Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Be'ezrat Hashem, tonight we will be continuing our study of Mesilat Yesharim. We're starting off Be'ezrat Hashem at the end of chapter 13, and we are going to be continuing Be'ezrat Hashem into learning Perek Yud Daled, chapter 14, Be'ezrat Hashem another chapter 15 as well, at least part of it. And we would like to thank our sponsors for tonight's shiur. The Choramian family sponsoring Leilui Nishmat Giti Bat Yaakov upon her 11 months since her passing. May her neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden, as well as Leilui Nishmat Menashe Ben Yaakov. May his neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden as well. B'ezrat Hashem, may they be Melitze Yosher for the family, and B'ezrat Hashem, the family should know only good news. B'ezrat Hashem. Also, we're sponsored by the Shaban family, sponsoring Leilui Nishmat Bracha Polet Bat Rachel. May her neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden, B'ezrat Hashem, upon her 11 months since her passing. May the family know only good news, B'ezrat Hashem, and only simchas from now on. And we're also learning for the Refuah Shlema of Shachar Ben Chana, Yaakov Yisrael, Avram Ben Chana, Esther Helen. May they have Refuah Shlema b'toch Shar Cholei Yisrael in the zchut of our learning, B'ezrat Hashem. So we're continuing in the study of Sefer Mesilat Yesharim. And last time that we were learning, we concluded, based on the Mesilat Yesharim's teachings, that there's an idea that even though something may be permissible, something might be allowed halachically, but not necessarily does it mean that the person is supposed to go ahead and do that. There's a concept called Kedoshim Tiyu, that we are supposed to be holy people, which means that although something may be technically permissible, the idea that we spoke about is a person is allowed to eat plenty of food, as much food as he likes. A person can have as much relations with his spouse that he or she would like. But at the same time, the Torah is requiring us to be holy, to lead lives of holiness, where the pursuit of physical pleasure is, although it is a part of our lives, but it shouldn't be the focus of our lives. Rather, it should be something that helps us, it serves its purpose of enabling us to achieve our real goal, which is to achieve spiritual heights in Torah and mitzvot. The question that came up was, what the Mesilat Yesharim ended off with last time saying was, well, then in that case, so then how come the Torah doesn't mandate that there should be things that we're not allowed to do? In the same way that the Torah says that you can't eat pig, then why doesn't the Torah say that you can only eat 3 meals a day, you can't eat 6 meals a day? Why doesn't the Torah say that? Or why didn't the rabbis make such a rule? And the answer is that the rabbis didn't make any rule like that, explains the Mesilat Yesharim, because there's a rule that rabbis are bound by, which is that you cannot make a rule, any kind of decree on the public that is too difficult for the public to handle. And any kind of rule like that is nullified. If it's too hard for the people to handle, then the halakha says that the rabbis cannot make such a decree. For that reason, the rabbis had to leave it to the people to decide what it is that they decide that they want to stay away from, and what it is that they decide they would like to do. But again, the idea is that it's something which ideally we all agree is correct, that we're not constantly indulging in worldly pleasures and doing everything that we're allowed to do. Because the pasuk is telling us, Kedoshim Tiyu, you're supposed to be holy. So therefore, the Mesilat Yesharim ends off saying, it's not possible that everybody in the nation is going to be on the same spiritual level. In the nation, there are people with all different types of levels, all different types of spiritual levels that each one is on. At the very least, says the Mesilat Yesharim, Yechidei Sgula, those people that are maybe not the majority of the nation, but still people who really are they want to climb the spiritual ladder, that they prepare themselves ועל ידי המוכנים יזכו גם הבלתי מוכנים אל אהבתו יתברך והשראת שכינתו. He says, these people are the ones that when they do their job and they say, you know what, we want to reach that spiritual level of kadoshim too, of being considered holy in the eyes of Hashem. So then because of what they do, says the Mesilat Yesharim, even those who don't have that level, they merit because of them. And that, he says, is the idea that we have by the lulav. The idea of the lulav is that we combine all four species together. The idea being that when you have a community, there are some people that they have, a good taste and a good smell, just like the etrog, which represents good deeds, and they have lots of Torah learning. You have some people that are just good taste, but no good smell. That represents the lulav that has Torah learning, but not necessarily good deeds. Then you have people that have a good smell, but no good deeds, right? Good smell that they have, they have the hadassim, they smell good, but they don't necessarily have any food. Then you have the people that are aravot, that they don't have good smell or good deeds. It's just nothing. No Torah, no mitzvot, but we're all together as one, in one nation. So because we have those people that are working on themselves and that are trying to do good for themselves spiritually, so they bring about atonement for the rest of the people who don't. It's a very interesting concept. So he says, Yavo ele, that's what the Midrash tells us, that those people who are achieving these high spiritual heights, they come v'yichapru al ele, and they atone for the people who are just, I would say, quote unquote, average, that are simply doing things as long as they're keeping the halacha, they're doing what they have to do, but they're not necessarily climbing to the higher level. So this is the concept that we're talking about now. The idea that there are some people that are willing to reach and to aim higher. They're not satisfied by just doing what they need to do. Yes, the food is kosher, 100%, but how much kosher food can you eat already? How many meals are you going to have a day? Or the person is married to this woman and he's with her, but the guy is, he understands that, yes, I could be with her 10 times a day. Okay, fine. But that's not kedoshim to you, right? It's pursuing life for worldly pleasures. And that explains the Ramban in the beginning of Parashat Kedoshim, is what we would call naval birshut Torah. The person that is simply running after worldly pleasures, kosher worldly pleasures, all kosher. He's not doing anything against halakha. But at the same time, he's running after worldly pleasures, which is not the purpose of life. So he's missing out. And there's a concept where a person is supposed to be aiming for higher. I'll give you an example, says the Mesilat Yesharim. Very interesting example that the Yerushalmi brings down. There's a maaseh in the Yerushalmi, in Masechet Trumot Perek Chet, with a man by the name of Ula Bar Koshev. This was a man who was a fugitive of the law, and he was somebody that the government was looking for him. He reached a certain city, and this was the city that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was present in that city with a great rabbi. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi knew that this Ula Bar Koshev was a fugitive. And the entire city was surrounded by government agents who then threatened that if the people of the city don't turn this man in, they'll get in trouble. And that's bad news for this entire city. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, following a teaching of the Braita, which is one of the earlier teachings, instructed this man to go ahead and to turn himself in. And he said, listen, this is wrong. Although, you're going to be in trouble. But because of you, we're all going to suffer because of that. And therefore, he instructed the person to turn himself in, and the person did turn himself in. This Ula Bar Koshev turned himself in, and everybody left. Now, Yoshua ben Levi was famous for the idea that Eliyahu Hanavi used to come visit him to teach him Torah, to study Torah with him. And what happened was, after this incident, Eliyahu Hanavi stopped coming. So he was very disturbed by this because he wanted to see Eliyahu Hanavi, to learn with him, to discuss things with him. and he prayed and he fasted, and he was very disturbed. And eventually Eliyahu came to him and said to him, does Eliyahu Hanavi come to talk to Musrim, informants, people who hand over Jews to the officials, to the government? Right? Is that something that Eliyahu Hanavi would want to be involved in, with someone like that kind of person? So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, but isn't that what it says in the Braita? Isn't that what it says? It's a kosher thing. I didn't do anything which is wrong. I didn't have any. I didn't violate any halacha. So Eliyahu Navi said to him, "V'chi mishnat chasidim hi." He says, "Yes, you're right. You didn't violate any halacha. But is that what a pious person like you is supposed to do? Is that what pious people do? People who go beyond the letter of the law. They're not only concerned with what the law permits, but rather they're concerned with reaching a level of holiness. Maybe more was expected of you. Maybe it was expected of you to try and help this person in a certain way, to do more for this individual." That's what Eliyahu told him. So very interesting. There's the letter of the law, and then what's expected of somebody who's aiming for higher, somebody who's trying to reach higher. It's possible that he was held accountable because he did something that, although the strict letter of the law permits it, he was somebody who was expected to try and do more for this person, instead of just inform him to turn himself in. So these are the levels of perishut that we're talking about, where somebody tries to reach higher, where he's not just satisfied with keeping the halacha, which itself is tremendous, which is very important, but he's even striving for more than that, to reach closer to Hashem. So now that's very important. However, the Mesilat Yesharim doesn't want to finish off the chapter on that note, that a person should always try and hold off from even things that are permissible. No, it's because sometimes that's going to lead to a problem. The problem is that if a person takes it too far, then he'll really be in trouble. If a person, God forbid, denies himself what he actually needs, in other words, he needs food, he needs sleep, he needs certain things in order to function. He needs to have a family life. He needs to have everything in order to function properly. It's a physical need that a person is created with. If he denies himself those things, if he hurts himself by doing things that cause himself pain in order to, quote unquote, reach a higher level, like what we would call sigufim. Sigufim means where the person does things to, quote unquote, punish himself. These things sometimes are a big problem, because the person is now denying himself what he actually needs. That, says the Mesilat Yesharim, is wrong. That's not correct at all. Person should never deny himself the things that he needs in order to function. We're talking about the things that are extra, the things that are by far more than what he actually needs. So these are things that are all very important to be aware of. So let's just end it off with the paragraph where he explains. הרי לך הכלל האמיתי, שכל מה שאינו מוכרח לאדם בענייני העולם הזה, ראוי לו שיפרוש מהם. Whatever is not necessary for this person in this world, it's correct, says the Mesilat Yesharim, to stay away from it. וכל מה שהוא מוכרח לו מאיזה טעם שיהיה, but if it is necessary for this person, then כיוון שהוא מוכרח לו, since this is necessary for the person's living, אם הוא פורש ממנו, הרי זה חוטא. If he stays away from it, that's considered to be a sin. So it's important to know what is necessary for a person, what is not necessary for a person. It is important to be aware of this. Sometimes a person can take things too far, and that's also not good. A person needs to have friendship with people. He needs to have relationships with people. There are moments where, yes, a person does need to relax. A person does need to have a laugh with somebody. Yes, as much as we want a person to reach holy levels, but again, these are needs. People are created in a certain way, and therefore they have to make sure that these needs are met. If they are not met, it's not good. It's considered to be a negative thing. If the person denies himself what he needs in order to survive, that's not a good thing either. So it's a balance. We need to do everything with moderation, and there needs to be a balance of what is okay and what is not okay. And this is something which a person has to develop on his own. He has to develop a feel for what is considered to be proper and necessary and what is considered to be too much, what is considered to be too little. This is something that a person has to develop a feel for themselves. Okay, so that's chapter 13. Baruch Hashem, we're now going to continue to chapter 14, which is called Bechilkei HaPrishut, the different parts of Prishut, of being separate from even things that are permissible. So, first of all, says the Mesilat Yesharim, there are three different parts to Prishut. He says Prishut means separation from that which is permissible. So he says, first of all, there's Prishut Behanaot. There's separation from things from pleasures, right? That we spoke about in the previous chapter, indulging in more pleasures than necessary. Then there's Prishut Bedinim, which means that a person not only is keeping the halacha, but the person is now going to be concerned for even the other minority opinions of maybe I'm doing something wrong according to even a minority opinion which we don't follow, right? Being concerned that he may be violating the halakha, even though we don't necessarily follow that minority opinion and we are more lenient. So we'll talk about that shortly. And also, Prishut b'minhagim, which means placing limits on social life as well. Person has to keep his focus on what is important, which is getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in these ways, he will understand that there are limits that need to be placed in all of these areas. So let's go through it one by one. So we mentioned in the last chapter the idea that there are limits that should be placed on worldly pleasures, right? So we spoke about food and having relations and clothing and trips and vacationing and all kinds of things, right? That when there are moments where a person needs to indulge in them, okay, very good. But to overdo it, we said, is already not good. That's the first level, the first type of separation we spoke about. Now, the prishut bedinim hu leachmir b'hem tamid. לחוש אפילו לדברי יחיד במחלוקת אם טעמו נראה אפילו שאין הלכה כמותו. He says, we know many times throughout the poskim, there are many different debates, different arguments about different things. And there are many times where we hold by a certain rabbi or a certain halakha that we all follow, and there's no issue with that. That is the accepted opinion. But then there's a level of a person who is really sincerely looking at the other opinion. And he says, you know what, this other opinion, although we disagree with him, although we think that he is wrong, but we hold, but I want to be stricter. I want to hold like that opinion. So again, this is a higher level. This is a person who knows that the halakha says that what we do is perfectly fine, but I'm taking a look at another opinion over here, and I see that this opinion is saying something which makes a lot of sense. And even though we disagree with him, I want to be strict and I want to follow that opinion. This, again, is a level which we are not expected to be doing. But for the person who wants to reach a higher level, right, the person who wants to come closer to Hashem because he's sincerely worried that maybe right now I'm not doing what Hashem wants. So therefore, I'm going to be strict. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for argument's sake, we hold that the halakha says that you're allowed to open the refrigerator on Shabbat, no problem, even though the motor is off right now. Just let me preface by saying there's a discussion amongst the rabbis. Can somebody open up the refrigerator on Shabbat when the motor is off? Is that something that we say, oh, it's no problem because you're not causing the motor to turn on? Or do we say, no, well, listen, you open the door, the hot air goes in and it's going to turn on the motor. Therefore, you're doing something which is a problem. Two different opinions amongst the rabbinic authorities. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that we hold that it's absolutely no problem to open up the door of a refrigerator, even when the motor is off. And we have no concern halachically that you might turn it on, that it might turn on because you're opening the door. We don't care about that. We say that that's not a problem according to the halakha for whatever reasons we hold. Then you have a guy that hears the other side of the argument, and he says, wait a second, they might have a point. The people who are strict about it, they might be right. What if, God forbid, I'm violating what Hashem wants? So this person, again, he knows what is the halakha. The halakha is that it's fine. I can open up the refrigerator even if the motor is off on Shabbat. No problem whatsoever. Perfectly fine. But then he says to himself, but you know what? Maybe that other opinion is right. And I think I want to be strict for that opinion. Okay, so he decides or she decides she wants to be strict about that opinion. Okay, so they are doing something. They are being strict. They are being machmir, which means they're being strict even in a place where they don't need to be. The halakha does not require this, but they decide they want to do that. So says the Mesilat Yesharim, this is something which is considered to be a praiseworthy thing. There's the Yechezkel Hanavi said about himself that he never ate from an animal that was slaughtered, and there was a question about this animal that they needed to ask the rabbi, and the rabbi said it was allowed. Even though the rabbi said it was allowed, he stayed away from it. Why? Because he didn't want to go near that. If there was a question, he wanted to stay away. But it's allowed. It's halachically permissible. He stayed away. I remember hearing a story about a lady that called up Rabbi Reisman, may he live and be well, in Brooklyn. And this was before Pesach, and she had cooked a soup in a non-Pesach pot. It was a regular, not kosher for Passover pot. And she cooked the soup there, and she called up the rabbi. And the rabbi thought about it, and he said, I think you're allowed to have the soup. She said, the soup? I threw the soup in the garbage. My question was on the pot, or something like that. The other dishes I used for while preparing it. The point was that even though the halakha said that this was allowed, this woman wasn't having any of this. She said, forget about it. I don't want to know any of this because it's Pesach. I don't take any chances. But the point is that there's an idea of a person having a sincere, deep inside feeling where even though I'm being told that this is allowed, I'm being told that this is okay, but still I have this feeling inside, I don't want to do that. I don't want to come close to that. So again, this is something which the halakha allows, but the person feels sincerely that they want to stay away from it. Now I want to give you another example, but before I give you this, after I give you this example, I want to tell you there's a flip side here which we have to be aware of too. Okay, so the Gemara gives another very interesting example. The Gemara tells us that there was a man, and his name was Mar Ukva, and he said that I am like vinegar next to my father, who is like wine. Why? He says, my father, whenever he ate meat, he would not eat cheese for another entire day. Now, we know the halakha is that you're allowed to eat cheese after meat. If you wait 6 hours, there's absolutely no problem to go ahead and to eat meat, and to eat cheese, rather. So over here, came along Mar Ukva and told us, but my father, he waited an entire day. So he's like wine, I'm like vinegar. I'm like, it's two separate things. So that's what he was comparing himself to. Now, the question over here, says the Mesilat Yesharim, after bringing this down, we have to ask ourselves a question. The Mefarshim asked this question. So you're saying that your father was a big tzaddik, that he would wait an entire day before he actually would consume cheese. He was a very big tzaddik. Even though the halakha says only 6 hours, but he was waiting an entire day. Huge tzaddik. So question for you, Mar Ukva. So why don't you do the same thing? Why is it that you don't also follow the custom of your father, wait an entire day, instead of saying that you're vinegar, the son of wine, say that you're wine, the son of wine, and follow in your father's footsteps? What's the problem over here? So the Mefarshim say, the answer is because it has to be sincere. When a person does something like this, it has to sincerely come from the heart that the guy is honestly scared that maybe I'm doing something that Hashem doesn't want me to do. Maybe by me, even let's say 15 hours later, having some cheese in my mouth, but I have a little burp of some leftover steak that I had, and there's a maybe little mixture of flavors of meat and milk in my mouth, maybe that really will make Hashem upset. So the person who's having that feeling is a totally personal, subjective feeling. It's got nothing to do with actual halakha. The halakha says 6 hours. That's it. 6 hours. And that's what we hold. But this rabbi had this personal feeling where he felt he wants to be strict. And his son, Mar Ukva, didn't. So for Mar Ukva to now jump and to just say, okay, I want to keep 24 hours, that doesn't work. It has to come from your heart, from you. You really feel that you have this fear that maybe right now I'm doing something which I shouldn't be doing. So it takes a certain level of sensitivity, spiritual sensitivity, to bring out that feeling inside of a person. So therefore, the rabbi who reached that level felt that he wants to do that. He wants to be strict like that. But is that guidance for the entire world? Is that guidance for the entire community, for the entire Klal Yisrael? Definitely not. It's something very personal, something that he decided that he wanted to do. So Mar Ukva was saying, my father reached such a level where this is what he, honest to God, had inside of his heart. This is what he felt. He was terrified to have any cheese within 24 hours of having meat. Okay, that's what he was doing. Okay, that's his level. That's what he reached. So that's the point over here, Rabotai. This is not halakha, but this is rather a personal feeling where a person reaches a point that he now decides although the halakha permits it, he's scared to follow the halakha because maybe this might be something that still is not what Hashem wants from him. So again, this is not an easy level, but it is something there. Now, I want to tell you the flip side. The flip side over here is that you have to remember that this kind of personal stringency that a person may accept upon himself or herself is never allowed to come on the cheshbon, on the account of other people that are important to you. Okay, I'll give you one example that I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is a story that I remember one time I was in Yerushalayim actually, and I heard a story from Chacham David Yosef, may he live and be well. He told me this story, and the story was about a Shabbat many, many years before that he, his wife, and his father, Alav Shalom, Chacham Ovadia, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, when they were walking together in Rechavia. Rechavia is a neighborhood in Yerushalayim. And he was machmir upon himself that he did not want to carry anything on Shabbat, even though there was an eruv in the vicinity. In other words, they were in a place where the halakha says you're allowed to carry. But he was strict upon himself and he did not want to carry in that neighborhood. And his wife was pushing the stroller. And his wife was carrying. When you push the stroller, that's considered carrying. So what happened was that they were walking in this neighborhood. Now, Rechavia is an area that has a lot of hills. And you have to walk at certain points up big hills. And she was pushing the stroller up a big hill. And he was, he wasn't doing anything. So his father, Alav Hashalom, Rabbi Vadia, called him over and said to him, listen, before you're machmir on not relying on the eruv, so, go ahead, rely on the eruv, push the stroller, and instead be machmir on being a mensch, be machmir on being good to your wife, and push the stroller and don't make her push it up this big hill. That's a very important lesson. So sometimes a person decides that he wants to take upon himself a big stringency, but it's going to cost somebody else, a significant other. That's something that you can't do, because your chumrah, which is wonderful in general, over here is causing suffering to somebody else, and that you have to worry about that. Now, yes, there are going to be times where your significant other will help you with your chumrah, but sometimes, like Rabbi Vadia said over here, that this was incorrect for him to do that. So he told him. Now, this is something that I remember I heard from Rabbi Eli Mansour. He once told over a story about a wife that was incredible. She was doing wonderful things, chesed, and she was feeding families that they had all kinds of issues, that they were going from one kind of issue to the next, and she was going and giving them meals, and she was really doing a tremendous amount of chesed. And whenever there was any kind of issue that popped up with any family, she would actually jot it down on a list on the refrigerator that at this address they need food, and at that address they need food for this meal and for that meal. And the husband and the kids, many times they were neglected because she wasn't, she was busy taking care of other families, but her own family, they were kind of left by the wayside. So he went to this rabbi and he asked him, what should I do? How should I proceed? We end up, not having dinner at night because she's feeding the rest of the world dinner. So this rabbi said, she has a list on the refrigerator, right? So he said, yes. So he said, so write down on the list of the refrigerator your home address. And that way she'll see that there's a list that this, family so-and-so at this address needs also dinner. And that way she'll get the message. But it's amazing, here you are, you think that you're being strict upon yourself to do chesed with the whole world. But meanwhile, you're leaving your family by the wayside. Excuse me. So that's a problem. Another example, sometimes you have a person, it says if you wash netilat yadayim, it's beautiful to wash netilat yadayim with a large amount of water. If you wash netilat yadayim with a large amount of water, it says you bring a lot of beracha to yourself. It's a beautiful segulah for a lot of parnasah. It's fantastic. So now you have a guy that he has this beautiful custom. He wants to be machmir. He wants to do things the best possible way. He fills up the washing cup all the way to the top, and he pours all of that on one hand, and he holds it by the faucet again. He fills up the cup all the way to the top, and then he pours it on the other hand. Beautiful. He's doing a great, great thing. Problem is, there's a line behind him with 20 people that are all trying to wash netilat yadayim, and they're all waiting for this guy to finish up. So again, sometimes as beautiful as your stringency may be, which is wonderful, but you have to put things in perspective in terms of the big picture as well. If it's going to cause people to be standing online for 20 minutes so that you can do your chumrah, then you have to rethink it. So that's another very important thing. But part of it, just to remember, is that whatever chumrah you do feel you want to take, it has to be sincere. There are great people like that. I remember once asking Rabbi Belsky, alav shalom, I heard somebody told me that when he was growing up, he used to go over to Rabbi Belsky's house a lot, and they never had any non-Jewish cereal in their house. All their cereals were, as they would call them, the Heimish brands, the brands that are produced by Jews. And the friend had concluded that that's because Rabbi Belsky holds that the cereals are not that they're not considered to be Pat Yisrael if they were just regular Cheerios or something like that. It's not Bishul Yisrael or Pat Yisrael or something like that. So I said, what? Let me go ask the rabbi. So I went to Rabbi Belsky and I asked him. I said, Rebbe, is this considered to be a problem of Pat Yisrael? I think I heard in the class, Rebbe told me that it's not. Rebbe said to the shiur, it's not. So the rabbi said, that's correct. It's not a problem of Pat Yisrael. It's not a problem of Bishul Yisrael. These things are not cooked. They're not baked. It's just dried out. So I said, so how come I heard from somebody that the rabbi doesn't have this in his house? So he said, because there's one opinion in Masechet Brachot. There's a Rabbeinu Yonah who says that it is. We don't hold like that by the halacha, but for my own home, I'm strict about it. So the halacha says it's fine. It's not an issue according to the halacha. There's no problem. But he knew of one opinion, and he was machmir for himself. But it was for himself. He wasn't going around telling the whole world what to do. He wasn't being strict on everybody else. He had a personal chumrah that he felt he wanted to be on a higher level, and that's what he did. Okay, so you're entitled. But again, it's sincere. It's from the bottom of his heart. He's just trying to make sure that he's not, doing something which Hashem doesn't want him to do. And also, he's not affecting anybody else. I mean, everybody's happy at home with the cereals that they have. There's no issues here, So therefore, it's okay. So you have to know how to do it, when to do it, under what circumstances, etc. If you ever have any question about something like this, then it's good to seek guidance from a rabbi that will tell you, yes, this is a good thing to do, or no, that's a problem. That's not the right thing to do. It's sometimes tricky to know exactly when it's okay and when it's not. Okay, let's continue. And number 3 says the Mesilat Yesharim, separation, prishut b'minhagim. הוא ההתבודדות וההיבדל מן החברה המדינית לפנות ליבו אל העבודה וההתבוננות בה כראוי. Sometimes a person has to say no to certain types of groups of people. Sometimes a person needs to understand that his or her involvement in a certain group of people, obviously we're not talking anymore about people that are detrimental to his spirituality. We're not talking about people that are speaking Lashon Hara, God forbid, people that are going to be influencing him in a negative way, showing him things he shouldn't see, telling him things he shouldn't hear. That, for sure, a person should never involve himself with such people. But over here, we're talking about a different level, and that is that even things that people are allowed to talk about. You're allowed to talk about politics. You're allowed to talk about current events. You're allowed to talk about fashion or things like that. You're allowed to talk about these things. It's not forbidden. You're allowed to talk about, let's say, basketball or the baseball stats or whatever. These things are permissible, but there's no question that these are what we would call dvarim betelim, pointless. I mean, maybe current events, sometimes you could learn things from, maybe history, you could learn things. So if it's positive, if it's productive, that's something else. But if it's a pointless, idle chat, idle conversation with nothing to gain from it other than just chit chat, or maybe some witty comments here and there that make you enjoy them. So then these are things that a person is losing by engaging in them. He's losing his time. He's losing valuable time serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The person could be learning Torah. The person could be saying Tehillim. The person could be doing all kinds of things. And instead, the person is wasting time, just really wasting time. Now, remember, you have to keep a balance. You have to remember that while you do need to limit this kind of interaction, at the same time, you also need some interaction like that. It's healthy to interact with people. It's important to have a relationship with people and to have friends and to be able to open up to somebody that you want to, be comfortable with. These are human needs which need to be addressed, and I would never want to deny them, right? It's very important to address human needs, but at the same time, people make a habit of chit-chatting and wasting so many hours of talking nonsense over the phone. Again, forget about if it's talking about forbidden things. That's for sure a problem. But even if it's not forbidden, you're simply just yapping away for no good reason other than just to schmooze for hours on end. This is something that really needs to be limited. Now, even though a person does need to have a friend, a person does need to have someone to talk to and to, have some light conversation, it's very important. It's not, I'm not trying to deny that, but a person needs to know to set the limits. Sometimes a person is just yapping away for hours. They don't realize it. but it's a long time. Meanwhile, they could have accomplished so much more. They could have enriched themselves with so many wonderful things that they could be doing. So, it's incorrect to, lock yourself up like a monk in a monastery and, have no connection with the outside world. It says in Chazal, Leolam teheh da'ato shel adam me'orevet im habriot. Person should always be mixed in with people and have a good relationship with people, and it's very positive. But at the same time, a person can very easily forget themselves and just go on and on, yap away for hours, and that's also wrong. That's incorrect. That's not something which is productive. It's actually wasteful in terms of time management, and therefore the Mesilat Yesharim is informing us over here that it's our job to set the limits on how much we engage in this kind of stuff. Again, is it permissible? Yes, it's permissible to talk about all these things. You're allowed to talk about baseball stats. You're allowed to talk about current events. You're allowed to talk about all these things. You're allowed. It's permissible. But how much time you spend on these things, how much time you devote to these things, how much you really pay attention to these things and put into it, the energy that you put into it, all of that is something that you will have to determine whether or not that's considered being wasteful in terms of your time, or whether it's being productive. And that's really something that you're going to have to determine on your own. And I'm sure that you'll see that this is something that we can all do better in this area. A lot of times we get caught up in things and we don't realize it. Before you know it, we're having a blast. 3-4 hours went by, and what have we to show for it? Meanwhile, we could have, said a few chapters of Tehillim at least. We could have attended a shiur. We could have done so many things, and instead, it went to waste. So chaval. So that's the idea over here. The Mesilat Yesharim is telling us that a person is responsible to set his own limits, to know what it is that he can handle and what is it that he cannot handle, and whatever is necessary to address that, and whatever is beyond necessary and something which is already wasteful as far as his time is concerned, to make sure that he sets the limits and doesn't allow it to get out of hand. Okay, so that's chapter 14 as well. It's important for us to remember the 3 things that he said, that we have to remember to set the limits on our pleasure that we indulge in, to set the limits on how we conduct ourselves as far as halakha is concerned, that we should try and develop sincere feelings of trying to be better in our observance of halakha, even when the halakha permits it. And also, like we said, limits on social life as well. Okay, let us begin Be'ezrat Hashem, Perek Tetvav. So this is called Bidarkei Kniyata Prishut. How does a person actually go ahead and acquire this level of prishut right now? How do you get there? What can you do to reach this level? These are, again, loftier levels. We're not talking now about the simple observance, but rather we're trying now to reach a higher level spiritually. So how does one do this? So over here, right now, the Mesilat Yesharim is really going to talk about something that I think we can really easily relate to. And he starts off with a discussion of the original chet, the original sin of Adam and Chava. And he says over here, what was it that caused Chava to mess up? So it says very clearly in the pasuk, Vatere ha'isha ki tov ha'etz lema'achal v'chi ta'avahu la'inayim. What caused her to mess up was the fact that she looked at this fruit. She saw that it was good and it was desirable to the eyes. Says the Mesilat Yesharim, it all starts with the eyes. That's where the person's desires stem from. It says, Ayn ro'ah v'lev chomed. When the eye sees, then the heart desires. And that's where the temptations come in. And now the question is, asks the Mesilat Yesharim, how do we fight it? Rabotai, this question is so relevant now, so much more so. It's been relevant since the beginning of time. But definitely nowadays, when we have all the technology and all the different avenues that are constantly in front of our eyes, bombarding us, whether it's an ad on the subway or on the bus or wherever it is that where things are in front of you, you're constantly surrounded by different advertisements. Whatever you watch, there's advertisements, and it's not necessarily for things that are bad. It's even for things that are 100% kosher. Let's say there's an advertisement for food. You see in front of you a nice, big, juicy steak, and the restaurant that they're advertising, and it looks great, and it's probably a fantastic evening that you'll enjoy if you go there. It's all very tempting, and we're now discussing the idea that we're trying to stay away from even that which is permissible, to try and realize that although it may be nice from time to time, we don't always need to have those kinds of dinners, but it looks really good. It looks really enjoyable. So over here, the question is, how does a person, when he's constantly in that situation like Chava was, where she sees the fruit in front of her, and that fruit for her is, so juicy, so tempting. How do you stay away from it? And now I want to point out one more thing before we move on. Look at the comparison that the Mesilat Yesharim is giving us. What he's telling us is that this fruit, again, by Chava's case, it was forbidden for her to eat it. But what he's trying to tell you here is that if you want to reach this level, then you have to look at these things which are unnecessary for you as forbidden, just like it was for Chava. Meaning, you have to look at this situation and say, hey, this right now, do I need it or do I not need it? Oh, I don't need it. So then in the same way that for Chava it was forbidden, for me, this is forbidden too, even though halachically it's perfectly fine. There's no halacha that says you're not allowed to eat a beautiful, juicy steak. Nowhere does it say that, right? But the idea over here is that for this person who's trying to reach a higher level, he's trying to separate himself from Olam Hazeh. He's trying to not indulge when he does not need to indulge. So his outlook needs to be that he's looking at this as forbidden. Just like it's almost like it's as if it's not kosher, but it is kosher. It's totally kosher. But the idea of the Mesilat Yesharim is that he's telling us over here, yeah, but for you, that you're trying to reach this higher level, you have to look at it as not kosher, because for you to reach that higher level, you're supposed to stay away, and for you, it's not kosher. Very interesting comparison from the Mesilat Yesharim. So therefore, he's telling us over here, so what can you do to get this to shut down this desire? You see it, you want it, it's desirable, it's enjoyable, and it's tempting you. So how do you fight against it? So says the Mesilat Yesharim, the answer is that you have to look at it. You have to look at it and say to yourself, you know what, this juicy steak is completely false. It's giving me some kind of feeling that if I consume it, I'll have some sort of satisfaction, some sort of pleasure. But in reality, there's nothing really here that's going to be so good for me. You got to stop and think, what good will come from this juicy purchase over here, right? He says, there's definitely going to be negative effects from it. He says, you know how many times a person will overeat something, he'll have so much of it, realize that you would have been just as full had you eaten something that didn't cost you $100 in a restaurant. Had you had something that was a little bit cheaper, you would have been just as full, and probably you wouldn't have been overstuffed, overeating. He says, how many times will a person have indigestion because of this? How many times will a person get ill because of this, because he overdoes it? How many times will there be ashanim hamabilim et sichlo? There's going to be fumes that come up from the stomach that go up to the head that cause a person all kinds of dreams at night and all kinds of things. He says, why? He says, there's definitely going to be negative that comes out from it. So if that's the case, so then what's the benefit in running after it? So really what it boils down to, says the Mesilat Yesharim, is a person stopping to think. if you will stop to think about the good that comes out, the pros versus the cons, then he says there's no question that you'll reach the conclusion that you will not need to go ahead and to do and to fall for that temptation, because you'll see that it doesn't give you anything. He says, that the person who consumes whatever it is that he's dealing with right now, it's in his mouth for a grand total of 5 minutes. He consumes it bite by bite, and says the Mesilat Yesharim, and before you know it, it's out the other end in 5 hours. So what have you gained from it? It's not really anything too good. So why are you spending so much money and time and focus and thought and energy? And I have to go to this place. I have to go to that place. I have to see this. I have to eat that. I have to do. But why? Why are you devoting so much time and energy to it? So this is something which is important for us to understand. If we really stop and think, which is generally the answer to all of our issues, if we stop and chart our course and we say, hey, this is something which is taking us away from where we need to go, so then that is going to help us to stay away from it. So that's a very important thing. And so too, when it comes not just to food, but to anything else. A person sometimes spends so much money, so much time focusing on, it could be cars, or it could be different things, different material possessions that a person gets into. And again, the person would have gotten to the same location even if he spent $15,000 or $20,000 less on a cheaper car, but just as good, just as fine, just as quality. Sometimes a person ends up spending so much time, energy, focus on these things which are just not as important as what really counts. So these are all things that the Mesilat Yesharim is telling us about, so that we realize that if we stop and think, we will see that it's just not so necessary to go ahead and to involve ourselves in these types of pursuits. And that way we will acquire Be'ezrat Hashem, the attribute of Perishut, which means staying away even from things that are permissible, because they take us away from the focus that we really should be focused on. And that's in terms of all of these things that we discussed tonight, whether it be food, whether it be other types of things, even permissible things that he can do, but if it's taking him away, then it's not good. Okay, with that, we'll call it a night, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. And if we have any questions, be happy to take them at this point if you would like to ask. If not, we can call it a night.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.